Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really quite happy and quite energized about giving this talk today. I hope everyone saw my email earlier this week in which I invited people to attend, and I had in that email a modern koan by Robert Aitken, Roshi, who wrote a book called Zen Master Raven. And this is one of the koans from that book. I'll say I bought this book years ago, and I started reading it, and it bothered me that the raven was always so wise, and there was never any question. And it's one of those things where the social structure just gets reinforced over and over again, and it seemed kind of it just didn't engage me at that time. But because I've been reading another book by Robert Aitken called The Mind of Clover, which is about the precepts, I decided he's a much better writer than I thought. In my original contact with the Zen Master Raven book. And so I picked it up again, and I flipped to this page, and I'm going to share screen and read the koan out loud here. And
Yes, I can.
let me make sure. Okay, great. All right, so it's from the book called Zen Master Ravings, Sayings and Doings of a Wise Bird, and it's called Not Helping. After a talk by Raven about the precepts, Woodpecker said, "The cowbird lays her eggs in the wren's nest, and the two wrens have to hustle to feed the cowbird's baby as well as their own. I don't see why the wrens stand for it, especially since the cowbird's baby is a lot bigger than theirs." That's supposed to say than theirs, not that theirs. Than theirs, and has a huge appetite. Maybe the wrens are really bodhisattvas, selflessly devoted to helping others. Raven said, "They aren't helping the cowbirds." So I had an immediate reaction to that, reading that it was not about cowbirds as such. I mean, on the basis of the facts, the wrens are helping the cowbirds. The cowbirds would not survive unless they were being fed by the wrens. The baby cowbird, right? And so they are passing along generations where this structure will be repeated over and over again. In the external world, the cowbirds are being helped. But to me, this was about my own interior landscape. And I'll just stop there. And what I want to do is just I was going to give you some background about cowbirds. Cowbirds are what they call obligate brood parasites. There are about 200 species of birds that engage in what is called brood parasitism, where they lay their eggs in other birds' nests, and their young are cared for by other birds. Some of those species of birds do it occasionally, situationally, and some of them do it only with their own species. So like a mockingbird can lay kind of maybe by mistake, lay an egg in another bird's nest, or maybe it's an evolutionary strategy where it increases the chances of the young surviving if another bird like themselves is raising it. But then there's this other category of brood parasites, of which the cowbirds, which are very familiar in Central Texas, they are obligate. They cannot build nests. They never had the experience of raising their own young. Their young only survive if their eggs are laid in another type of bird's nest and are fed by this other bird. You know, in nature, there's constant predation. Cats eat mice. And you know, on and on and on throughout the animal kingdom. But there's something about parasitism that seems especially cruel. Seems especially strange that nature would have devised this as a way of life continuing. There are Darwin studied insects, and he discovered that there are wasps that lay their eggs on caterpillars, and the eggs hatch out, and then they eat the caterpillar alive. And Darwin wrote to a friend of his and said, I can no longer believe in a benevolent God who would create such cruelty. And there's something about the way in which cowbirds and other species are bound together that seems baroquely cruel. The cowbirds scout out the most vulnerable potential nests, and they may kick out the eggs that the other bird has laid. The other bird may be able to kick out the cowbird's eggs, but then the cowbird has adapted a behavior where they will then go and destroy the eggs of the birds who kicked out the cowbird eggs. This dance of competing behaviors seems very cruel to me. So that's just the exterior story, and I lay that out just because it's part of the world that we live in. But then there's also an interior story that this speaks to for me. And before I get to that, I want to just take a break here and ask our online monitor to put people into groups, and the people in the Zendo, if you would, break into groups. So there's 4 people in the Zendo, right? So if you would go into groups of 2 and reflect on we'll just do this for about 5 minutes. So reflect on the koan for 5 minutes, and then just speak to what it brings up in you, if anything. And then we'll come back together and share. And like I say, I have some ideas about it, but I don't want to share that yet until I have a chance to know what other people's reactions are, because I think this is a very multivariate sort of a koan that can bring up many different things, and points to a lot of potential things within our practice. So, and I want to hear what other people have to say. Is that okay? The woodpecker asks the raven about a situation and has a question and says maybe the wrens are bodhisattvas that are kindly helping out others, and raven seemingly contradicts that. But what does it mean? What does raven mean when he says that they're not helping the cowbirds? That's a question that jumped out at me. So anybody willing to share what they shared with their breakout room partners? Or I guess it's best for us to speak for our own selves and not automatically hear what other people had to say. But okay, Anne's got her hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, I spoke with Jess, and we talked about volition and whether you have to make a decision to be kind or helpful, to be a bodhisattva, if it's just your quote-unquote nature, whether that can be seen to be helping. So if the wren, we kind of debunked this later by the idea that the cowbirds will then come back and attack the eggs of the wrens that have kicked out the cowbird eggs, but perhaps it's instinctual, non-volitional for the wrens to care for whatever is in their nest once they are young, and that it's not so much that they're helping, that they're just being wrens.
Thank you. Rosemarie?
Yeah, I just had this thought now that if the wrens did not do it, that maybe the cowbirds could learn. I know in the reality of the species that's not true, but maybe in the reality of Koan study and exploration, they would be able to learn to build a nest which their eggs need. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Rosemarie, my thought on it is parallel to what you were just expressing, I think. But again, I want to hang on and share it kind of at the end of the discussion here. Ramona?
Yes. Okay, just a second here. Okay. I really like this koan, and I've thought of myself as a wren because as an older single mother, I adopted my son from Russia when he was 7 months old, and he's 20 now. And so I like what the raven says. They aren't helping the cowbirds. I did it for myself. I did it because I wanted to know more about life and love, and I wanted to be a mother. I wanted to be more developed as a person. So that's why I love the koan. Yeah.
Ramona, I'm going to repeat what I said to you. Ramona and I were in a breakout room together, and I asked her if she would be willing to share this in the group, and then I shared with her that I also, as many people know, I'm an adoptive father. Our son is 32 currently, and we adopted him as an infant. And there were people that reacted, I thought, pretty negatively when they learned we had adopted. They was like, "Well, how can you care for a stranger?"
Mm-hmm.
You know? And they didn't realize that because of our biological drive, because of our desire to be parents, that this was one of the happiest events of our lives. That this was
Right.
and that there was no question about our desire to nurture this child. It was just automatic, and so fulfilling and so rewarding. Even though there have been many difficulties, still
Yes.
so rewarding. You know.
Yes. I feel that way too. That a lot of people discouraged me. They said I was too old and I shouldn't do it alone, and there were too many risks, going to a place like Russia, and that people just tried to talk me out of it.
Well, so I want to say, Ramona, that my reaction to what you shared was that you read this, that the that Raven was saying they were not intending to help the cowbirds, and it was not a question of whether or not they were helping the cowbirds. It was that their intention was to act out of their own nurturing instincts, and that's a generous reading of the koan, a true and generous reading of the koan. So I just want to recognize that. As I say, this is multivariate. There's many, many different ways to read this, and to see what practice edges it points to within us, and what qualities it evokes in us, like generosity and sympathetic joy. That those things can be brought up in this context. Serenity, hi.
I don't know if I can articulate this very well this morning, but for me, part of the koan is, the cowbird's behavior is part of nature, for better or for worse. And I think that we as human beings with our 25% free will have used the other 75% to justify, being part of nature and engaging in all sorts of bad behavior, kind of like extortion kind of stuff. You will raise these kids or not, and, I think that some of the philosophers, I think of Descartes in particular, who has a lot to answer for in the West, because part of their philosophy set humans opposed to nature, in opposition, for whatever reason, with, I think, therefore I am, kind of thought. And, it's a puzzle, of, do those who are generous are often taken advantage of by those who are less scrupulous, perhaps. And, those are just some of the things that are running around in my slightly caffeinated brain this morning. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of those bits and pieces. And that's not exactly all we talked about in our little group, but it's what occurred to me afterwards.
Let me ask, that's a very interesting point, that in our society, those who are generous can be taken advantage of, can be preyed upon by those who have a mindset to do that kind of thing. What does that bring up in you? Does that, having had that thought, do you think, I must guard myself, I must set boundaries, or do you think that's a fact in nature, that's a fact in human society, and I'm aware of that, and I still need to maintain an open heart, So
I look at my open-heartedness and say that, I'm still going to be the generous person that I am up to and until some random boundary is crossed and it becomes clear that someone else is behaving as a predator, and then no more.
Right.
I think that part is there for sure. And I have a certain amount of naivete in situations with people, especially a certain, I don't always connect, or I don't always anticipate or be able to see how people are behaving, but at some point when it becomes clear, I recognize predators, that's for sure. And having been a victim of them myself at times, I've learned, this far and no further. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, to me, that's part of the things with all koans is like, what practice edge do they bring up? What kind of emotional response, or what do they point to within myself that automatically arises, and do I have to always automatically believe that? And I'm just reacting to what you just said. It seemed like a pretty balanced viewpoint, that you're not tilting too far in one direction or the other, that you know that there are safety issues and self-integrity issues that are worth maintaining, but that should not keep you from doing what you can to keep your heart open and to connect with other people. That seems very balanced to me. And I thank you for putting it the way you did.
You know, tapping into joy is a way of doing that circumvents some of the thinking brain. So
Thank you.
thank
Right.
you.
Marla, I see your hand up.
Yes, what comes to my mind is almost a global or international view on this. The United States and around altruism, the United States has historically been generous, if you will, with international foreign aid, helping countries who are less fortunate with certain, and we all know what that's about. And there are people in the United States who think that that's horrible, that we should be taking care of our own poor people first. So it seems like it's a clash between altruism and isolationism, whereas there's another element there, and that is pragmatic self-interest. I think that, diplomatically, we as a country have done that for a lot of reasons without any altruism whatsoever, but to preserve stability in the world. Is that altruistic? No, not really. So it's that there are these different and competing motivations and intentions for activities that look to some of us like they're pretty clear cut. And that's not just true about generosity. It's true about, of course, everything that we do and how we interact. So.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. And in the cases of, international relationships, it's very hard to tease out what is self-interest and what is not, what is actual generosity and what is manipulation, and all sorts of other questions that are related to that. And it's interesting that this little short paragraph points even to that. So, any other reactions? I see Jess has raised his hand, and then Rosemary.
Yeah, my thought was like initially reading the passage, you kind of have I had this natural feeling of the wren being the good bird and the cowbird being the bad bird.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm dividing these birds now into this has more goodness than that one, and it reminded me of well, one is with cats. I have a cat. I love cats, and cats are pure carnivores. They're eating whatever. They're not, not being non-violent towards their environment, and but I still love them, right? It's still they're still there. So there's this part of nature that is as it is, and it can be painful, and and the cowbird is maybe this is the most evolutionarily adaptive for this particular bird for whatever reason that I don't understand. And I think about also how the world is sometimes really painful, but I feel like one of the admission criteria for a Zen center is pain. We've experienced pain in this world, and that's what brings us here. So it's kind of this connected in that way. And the last thought is I like to play poker, and so poker it's a lot of you're playing, you're trying to play against weaker players, and it has these elements of like how I feel like the natural world is, and it doesn't have this feeling of like benevolence that I get, and it's very self-serving, and like what is the point? But it just,
and you have to be deceptive.
right.
Deception is a key element in playing poker, right?
Yeah, it's a key element. You can't flip your cards up. You have to be deceptive. You have to, and you're really, but it's this thing about, there's something that draws to me about it, just like this is, in some ways, life as it is. And it's like, if I turn myself away from it, am I deluding myself? I don't know. It's like this blend that we find ourselves in, because I still question why I play poker. It doesn't seem to have some of these qualities, but it feels like there's some truth in it for me in this moment,
It's probably been kind of said already in a different way, but so I went through several things. My immediate reaction was, oh yeah, those cowbirds, and they're not being responsible. That was my initial thing. And we're not helping them because they can do it on their own. That was the initial thought. And then eventually I got to a place saying, well, this is nature, and this is the rules of nature. That human beings really don't have a clue about that, or are very accepting of that. And who knows why anything happens the way it does. But we ultimately have to accept it no matter, because this is what is happening. So it's I don't know, I kind of dumped it off into that that nature, life, and life-giving force is everywhere, and it continues no matter what. We have was saying to somebody that there was always weeds in the cracks, we want to stamp them out, but no matter what, they always appear. So there's always this life force. It's always going, and it goes way beyond us. It goes way beyond us. And we can make judgments all day long, but it doesn't have a whole lot of merit, I don't think, because it's a different thing. It's not human. Although human is a part of it. Being human. Because we're continuing to live and be lived and create life in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
That is my thoughts.
Thank you, Lori. I'm thinking, in response to what you just said, I think of the line from the Shin Ming, that the dividing, I'm obviously paraphrasing, but the dividing of the world into good and bad cowbirds, good wrens, that's the primal disease of the mind. It's like what we have to do. It is a disease, but it is the primal disease. We can't get away from that type of dividing up without lots of work, and those kinds of judgments just creep in over and over again, and it's something important to recognize about ourselves, and why reading the Shin Ming every once in a while is a good idea. Rosemarie?
I'll be brief, Joel, because I know you want to say how it affected you. But so I was thinking that, and this is along with what Jess and Lori were saying about life as it is, and the whole fabric of life includes all of these things. And maybe what Raven is saying is that the wrens are not helping. They're just doing what's needed to keep the whole ecosystem going. So maybe that's just another way of saying helping, but it's, maybe that's kind of what he's after. That's what I thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nature has worked it out so that the wrens, by following their blind instinct, are supporting the whole system. The wrens don't get a say in it, and the cowbirds don't get a say in it. it's the whole system is set up so that the instinctual behaviors of all of them support the whole system. Which, again, acting out of the primal disease of my mind, it's like, no, I don't want that. I want the wrens to be able to take care of themselves and the cowbirds to take care of themselves. You know? It's like I'm saying I have lots of aversion to that setup, and I want to grasp onto a different way. So, anybody else? And if not, I'm going to launch into my own version of it and my reaction that I had on first reading it, which was that it had to do with my interior landscape. So, as everyone who has heard me talk before has probably heard me mention, I feel like I have a pretty strong case of ADD. I'm very distractible. I'm very focus is difficult for me, and I considered it utterly miraculous that I held a job for close to 50 years, and had some success in the job, and raised a lot of money, and edited the magazine, and wrote 2 books, and did these other things that right now, looking back on them, it's like, how did I ever manage those things? Since I have retired, the external inputs such as dread and fear, which drove a lot of my successful behaviors before, those have diminished. So I don't have to worry about a boss wanting to fire me anymore. And I take longer naps, and I indulge in some behaviors that on reading this, it struck me that there are behaviors where there's low effort and there's high mental reward, that you get dopamine rewards in your brain, or serotonin, or whatever. There's all these brain chemicals, and they interact in various complicated ways. So I'll just use dopamine as a shorthand and say, I do a crossword puzzle very soon after I wake up in the morning, and I do spelling bee on the New York Times and Wordle and so on, and I'm addicted to these things, and I know that I'm addicted to them because they are, in relative terms for me, low effort, and I get an immediate reward for them. So I was just reflecting that those are like the cowbirds in my psyche. They are the things that pop up and want to be fed right away, and it's easy for me to respond to them. And that what I read into the koan is, well, maybe I am damaging the parts of myself that require a little bit more effort. Maybe by always automatically giving in to the low effort, high reward things within myself, that I am actually doing myself some injury. And that was my reaction to the koan. But as has been said over and over, so tellingly and so wisely here, that there are many different ways of reading this koan. And more than that, as Flint has talked recently about fear and life and death and so on, that these are all facts of our lives, and that our calling as Zen practitioners is to not divide them up into good and bad. So, in reading that story, I thought, oh, I have bad parts of my psyche, and I'm feeding them. I have good parts of my psyche, and I'm injuring them. I'm just applying good and bad right away. But what Flint has been talking about in Inquiry and other times that I've heard him talk recently is that we have to embrace it all, and that we have to acknowledge those things that are the most difficult. And actually, Rosemary recently said something to me. Rosemary, could I ask you to repeat what it is that you're talking about, what Flint said?
Sure. Yeah, I was talking to Flint about a difficult part, and it's comparing mind, and that I've been working with, and which is the difficult part. And his response was to be kind to that part because it's suffering. And that was really so helpful to me, because I hadn't seen it that way. I'd seen it as, something that I'd rather not have, but that comes up a lot. And the idea of cultivating kindness for that part because it's suffering was really, really so helpful to me. So that's what I was talking to Joel about. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Rosemary. That really speaks to me. And I've heard Flint say things like that before, but in the context that you presented it, it's particularly moving to me. And it's like I'm dividing. I'm making judgments about things that happen in my mind, and I can certainly recognize that there are skillful and less skillful ways of addressing those parts in my psyche. But as one of the birds in the nest, one of the baby birds in the nest, will it be beneficial to me to push one of the other ones out of the nest? Probably not. The system is set up this way so that freedom can emerge. And we are humans. We have this 25% capacity, as Serenity says. I'm not sure it's that high a percentage. But this capacity to be able to reflect on our experience, to reflect on what nature tells us, nature shows us over and over again, what other people show us and tell us, and how we can respond to them in ways that will decrease our suffering or increase our suffering or sustain suffering. But that we have the capacity to, in this life, decrease our suffering. And that we have the capacity to choose when we get cues from within ourselves and from the exterior environment, to choose to move away from suffering and toward freedom. So that's what I'm so grateful for, all these different perspectives and all the practice edges that were brought up, all the reflections on the interconnection between our minds and nature that were brought forward. And I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to present what it brought it up in me, what this story brought up in me, and to have it met by so many kind faces, so many smiles and gestures of recognition and solidarity, as it almost, So thank you.